and everyone. It's just that Starfield has given us a good opportunity to utilize this game as a jumping off moment, to initiate this discussion, because it's something that needs to be said. And a few days ago, I talked about the concept of review scores and the ever-evolving landscape of video game journalism. But today, let's get critical. Let's call some crap out. The shirt's getting unbuttoned, and the fists are coming out in Minecraft. Let's talk about bias. Bias is something that is inherent to the video games industry. It is inherent to all of us. We all have our own biases. And in my opinion, as a video game journalist, or even as a critic, the goal is to put your biases either to the side as much as you can, understanding that you cannot eliminate them wholeheartedly, or to put your biases in the forefront so that the consumer can understand them and then utilize that to augment their perspective or their value towards your opinion. It is easy to say, be as unbiased as you can. It is a hard thing to do, because think of all the ways you can be biased if you're a video game journalist. Whether or not you receive a review copy. Total Biscuit used to talk about this all the time. If you receive a free review copy, then there is an inherent level of bias there for you to maybe want to get more, or you get inundated with them so much and on such an often basis that the mere act of receiving a review copy is not going to really move the goalpost for you at all. However, if you don't receive a review copy, well, that also creates a bias, because why didn't they pick me? And whether or not it affects your opinion as a critic or as a reviewer is irregardless to this conversation, because the underlying point is that the act itself creates a bias on some level, whether it's big or small. Again, bias isn't inherently a bad thing, but hiding a bias, that can be. For instance, you wanna know the reason I'm not playing Starfield right now? Because it's not the quality of the game. It's a very simple reason. My SSD is too small. My computer is like 8 to 10 years old at this point. I cannot run Starfield. I have a PlayStation 5 because Sony's exclusives appeal to me more. And I have a PC. So my thought process was, well, if there is an Xbox or a Microsoft game that I want to play, I have a PC and I have a PS5. I cover all my bases there. Is that going to affect my opinion on Starfield or wish it's ill for some reason because I can't play it? No, of course not. I want that game to succeed. I want that game to be a banger, because console wars are inherently anti-consumer, which we'll get back to in a minute. But those are my biases. I have a PlayStation 5 and I do not have a way to play Starfield. It sucks. I would like to play it. I like space games. I think they're pretty cool. And I love Skyrim back in the day. What am I gonna do? I'm not ashamed of that. I'm not gonna try and hide it. And whether or not that augments your opinions on my takes about Starfield and the broader discussion as a whole, you go right on ahead, because you are entitled to your opinion, and I'm entitled to mine. What I am not entitled to is you taking my opinion seriously. If you do, that's great. You don't have to, though. But here's the problem. Let's say I was a big fan of PlayStation. I've owned every PlayStation console up to this point outside of the Vita. But let's say I was an unabashed Sony fanboy, and I came out with a review of Starfield, and let's say I had some kind of access to play the game, and I talk a whole bunch of trash about the game, but I didn't tell you about my biases towards Sony, for whatever reason. Would that color your perspective about that review? Of course it would. It makes sense, right? It's only natural. Same thing in reverse. Let's say I was a massive Xbox fan. I owned an Xbox 360 and an Xbox One. I loved Halo. Halo is one of my favorite series of all time. And let's say that I was a massive fan of Microsoft and Xbox. I own a bunch of merchandise, and I really leaned into the whole console wars aspect of things. And I came out with a review of Final Fantasy 16, and I said it was a whole bunch of giga trash, and that Final Fantasy 15 was better. And I come out with a whole bunch of scathing points about the game. Would you take that seriously? Would you take it seriously if you knew I was a massive Xbox fan? Biases are important. They are. They're inescapable. But hiding biases, especially within the realm of video game journalism, can be detrimental to the consumer. Not just can be, is detrimental to the consumer. Because it removes a key piece of information that might augment their impressions about your review or your take. let's talk about Starfield again. And I mentioned this in my last video about Starfield and the overall state of games journalism, and how certain outlets like Eurogamer or Metro.co.uk, that's a website I know, received their review copies after a lot of other a bunch of other outlets. Now, you can have whatever opinion about that you want. You are entitled to that. You have that right. But think about it. What benefit to the consumer does that do for you? What benefit to the consumer is created by blacklisting certain industries, or certain companies, or certain outlets, or just delaying review copies until they're not going to be able to put out a review until after all the hand-picked companies and outlets are able to do so? That demonstrates favoritism. That demonstrates, even to certain outlets, that you are preferred by Bethesda or whoever gave out those review copies. You are preferred compared to someone else, or you are not preferred to someone else. Again, unnecessary bias is created, and it's a bias that works towards Bethesda and Microsoft's advantage, one way or the other, regardless of origin. And so what do a lot of companies and outlets do? Not all of them, but what do a lot of them do? And I talked about this in my last video as well. They act as glorified puff pieces. They act as glorified ways to extend the marketing arm of the company. How can you as the consumer take the opinion seriously when it just feels like an extended trailer to you? When it just feels like an extension of a single individual company's will. Now bear in mind, this isn't just about Bethesda. There are so many companies out there, so many outlets, so many reviewers, so many critics that paint things in a favorable light while ignoring actionable, useful critique that could be beneficial and valuable to the consumer for whatever reason. And trust in video game journalism is at an all-time low, at least in my anecdotal experience. Because how can you take that industry seriously? How can you take it seriously when the critics feel like an extension of the marketing branch and not as critics? Critique and review is important to the consumer. It allows the player or the consumer to be made aware of certain aspects of a game so that the consumer can make their own decision for themselves. Consumers do not want to be preached at. They want to be provided information, whether or not that's in the guise of an entertaining format. They want to be provided information, or at least should be provided information, so that the consumer themselves are allowed to make their own choice, not try and have their decision masqueraded for them. And when it comes to Bethesda specifically, I do not know why it's been acceptable to normalize the buggy nature that Bethesda games often release in. I do not know why that has become mainstream and acceptable and normalized to release unfinished, unpolished, buggy messes of games. It baffles my mind because it benefits the consumer in no tangible way. If the bugs and the glitches do not bother you as the player, that is fine. But they don't enhance your experience, do they? Okay, let me clarify. There are some that can be kind of funny. We can all admit that. Sometimes a bug or a glitch can be funny. But when a game is riddled with them, when a game is fully permeated with them, how does it benefit you, the consumer? In no other field would it be acceptable to sell the consumer a buggy, unfinished mess. If I go out and buy a laundry machine, I want it to work 100% of the time. I do not want it to work 75% of the time, and the other 25% it acts as an oven. If I go out and buy a book, I don't want there to be a bunch of missing pages, because it's quirky and adds to the experience. I want a finished book if I go out and buy it. But the problem is, and we go back to the console wars argument, because you have your fanboys on Twitter who will go to bat and go to war for their favorite plastic box. But you also have people that will willingly defend a game just because they bought it, because they don't want to seem like a sucker. They don't want to seem like someone who made an incorrect purchasing decision, because they feel it'll make them look stupid or like an idiot. And it doesn't. It really doesn't. We've all been hoodwinked in the past. We've all been led astray. And it's okay to enjoy a game, especially a game like Starfield. It's 100% okay to have that game, to play it, and to absolutely adore it, for it to be your game of the year. There's absolutely, positively no problem with that. In fact, I'm happy for you, because you were able to have such a good experience with a game, And that's great. That's the beautiful thing about video games. But the problem is when we try and justify anti-consumer practices, anti-consumer behavior, in the guise of propping us up as an individual, so that we feel better, instead of trying to make the industry better, instead of holding things accountable, instead of raising the bar of standards. We allow and we normalize anti-consumer behavior and rhetoric and practices that deteriorate the industry as a whole. And no, I'm not going to blame consumers for buying a Bethesda game and expecting it to be polished. You should do your research beforehand, and then judge whether or not that will impact you. You should do that, but I'm not going to say the consumer is responsible when Bethesda, when Microsoft, should have made the game polished from the beginning. No game will not have a bug or a glitch. That's a reality. And if they do, that's a freaking marvel. But the degree to which Bethesda games are often released in such a buggy, unfinished state baffles the mind as to how that has been normalized, how that behavior has been acceptable, en masse. Because it drags the rest of the industry down. It lowers the standards of the industry as a whole. Bethesda aren't the only ones who do this. Bear that in mind. But that's also a bad thing. Because if it was just Bethesda, that'd be one thing. This is an industry-wide practice. When we are able to look at a game like Baldur's Gate 3 and say, wow, this game didn't release with predatory monetization, or riddled with bugs and glitches, or ripped out content to be sold to you piecemeal as microtransactions. Wow, what a notion. When that is seen as exceptional, that is the true indictment of the modern video game industry landscape. That is the issue. That is the problem. When we look at games like Baldur's Gate 3 and say, wow, what a concept, when that should be the standard. Not the amount of content in Baldur's Gate 3, but the level of polish should be. The level of care, the attention to detail, that should be. At least for AAA games. At least. But the problem is, every now and then, we accept and we normalize just a little bit worse behavior. Just a little bit. And then next time, oh, it's a little bad from what came before, but it's not that bad, right? And it chips and it chips and it chips away at the industry at large until at the end result, when we look at what we have now compared to what we had in the past, we are baffled by how far it has denigrated on the whole. I think I meant degraded. I have been following Starfield for a little bit now, and I have not seen, granted, I have not seen, not saying that it doesn't exist, I have not seen many, if any, articles written by major publications about the state of the performance of Starfield. Outside of, like, one article I saw about the FPS for the game being kind of smooth. At least a smooth 30. Which is still, like, it's 30 on a new console, but, like, I saw the review score, the review, and then a whole bunch of guides about the game. The video game. Actual analytical critique, I have not really seen all that much. Outside of, here's our review, we gave it X number, whatever. I've only heard about the performance from other players. What does that say about the state of modern games journalism? What does that say? You would think this would be in the inverse. That the critics, that the reviewers, would be going on about the glitches, the performance, whatever, how the game runs, whether it's good or bad. You would think that would make up the bulk of the conversation surrounding the game for these outlets, but it isn't. It's the other way around, where the consumers have to come out en masse and talk about these things, and whether or not they personally or individually find it acceptable or fine enough. Which, if you do, that's fine. I'm not here to tell you that you should look at a glitch or a bug and say that's unacceptable on an individual level. That is up to personal preference and personal, well, belief. You have the right to make your own mind up, to come up with your own opinions, but you should be at least provided or have ease of access to opinions or information surrounding the game so that you can more easily make your own decision, come up to your own conclusion. But the state and quality of video game journalism on the whole has degraded to such a point that it's hard to take it seriously. And there's an argument, there's a conversation to be had that partly this was done in the search for clicks. That's a legit argument and point that can be brought up to this. But here's the other thing. It can also be perceived as companies seeking out positive or favorable reception from these companies. And that's an issue. Even if the actions can be perceived that way, even if they aren't meant to be, if the actions can be perceived that way, that is an issue. Because it erodes trust in journalism. It erodes trust in critique. And that should not be the case. Because that is anti-consumer. Console wars and going to bat for your favorite plastic box is anti-consumer because it forwards and normalizes this continued decline in the quality of games on the whole, to where we prop up games like Final Fantasy XVI or Baldur's Gate 3 for releasing in finished states. That shouldn't be an exception to the rule. That should be the norm, the rule. That shouldn't even be the goalpost. That should be the bare minimum. But unfortunately, over the years, that low bar seems like it's at the top of the mountain. And if there was ever an indictment of the state of game journalism and critique and discussion on the internet, that would be it in my opinion. But hey, those are just my thoughts, my opinions, my perspectives on the whole industry as a whole. Bias exists. It will always exist. It's fine that it exists, but it should be known. It should be disclaimed so that the consumer can make their own decision about what to do with it. But it is also on the part of critics and outlets to try their best to minimalize it, receiving review copies before anyone else, being invited to private media sessions, being flown out to various events for the game. That creates bias. That skews perception, that skews perspective, and it does a disservice to consumers. Total Biscuit called this crap out years ago, and it's only gotten worse. And again, this isn't just Bethesda, this isn't just Microsoft. They're just the recent case of an industry-wide issue, a problem that has been identified for years, dang near a decade if not more, and nothing has been done to it. It erodes trust in the consumer to the very outlets and critics that they should be able to look at and say, you know what, I can take your opinion seriously. That does not exist en masse anymore. The state of games journalism, the state of games coverage has forever irrevocably changed with the state of YouTube and Twitch, and that couldn't have happened at a better time. When games journalism on the whole has degraded and eroded and been poisoned to such a degree that it is impossible to take it seriously anymore. Consumers have to look out for other consumers. That's what we've been forced to do, and that is what we have had to accept. Because again, it's okay to have biases. It's okay to like things. It's okay to not like things. But if you're gonna make a review, if you're gonna be a critic, wear them on your sleeve. Let those biases be easily identifiable. And try your best to reduce them, or to minimalize them, or to prevent future biases from forming to begin with. Because when you lean into them, your opinion is forever compromised. Your value to the consumer is forever compromised. And with that, I will call the video there for the day. You know what? It felt good to get that off my chest. I think I'm gonna go play some video games. Because video games are cool. They're great. I love talking about them. The good and the bad. So leave a comment down below with your favorite game of the last couple of years. I'd love to hear your stories. Let's get some positivity down there. But also, I want to hear your perspective and your opinion on the subject matter. When do you think this became a massive systemic issue? Has it always been, or was there a singular moment that you can think of, or a series of moments that at least made this apparent to you? I'd love to hear your thoughts, hear your opinions, and hear your perspectives. Stay safe, have a great day. Please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day, go play some video games if you can, and as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody, until we meet again.